It was supposed to be a quiet Saturday morning. The sun had just peeked over the treetops, casting golden light on the freshly mowed grass in front of our suburban home. I was inside preparing breakfast when I heard the yelling. My 8-year-old son, Mason, had gone out to water the flowers, something he loved doing ever since he helped me plant them. But the calm was shattered when two men in fake-looking uniforms marched up to him. I looked out the window, just in time to see one of them grab Mason by the arm. My heart stopped. I dropped the pan on the stove and sprinted outside. "Hey!" I shouted, but they ignored me. One of them flashed a badge that looked more like it belonged in a costume shop than a police department. "We're with the HOA enforcement. This lawn doesn't meet community standards," he barked. "You people think you can ignore the rules? You people?" My blood boiled. Mason was terrified, tears forming in his eyes as they tried to drag him off our own property. "Let him go," I demanded. "This is private property, and he's a child." The shorter guy leaned in close and said, "Ma'am, if you don't calm down, we'll fine you and remove the boy for trespassing." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Trespassing? On our own front yard? I pulled out my phone and started recording. That's when they backed up a bit, but they didn't leave. Instead, they stood their ground like they were proud of what they were doing. What they didn't know was that Mason's father, my husband, was the newly appointed sheriff of the county, and they had just messed with the wrong family. I texted him one word: "Now." Then I turned my attention back to those men who were about to learn what real law enforcement looked like. The so-called HOA officers didn't budge. One of them, a tall, graying man with sunglasses he didn't need, crossed his arms and barked, "This is an HOA matter. If you don't want trouble, stay in your house, lady." But Mason was still standing behind me, gripping my leg and trembling. I could feel his small fingers digging into my jeans, and that was all I needed to stay calm. I knelt to comfort him, then rose slowly, phone still recording. I repeated louder this time, "You're harassing a child on private property. This is illegal. Leave now." The shorter guy stepped closer. "We've received complaints. He was damaging the lawn. Your yard's not up to code." I stared at them, baffled. Damaging the lawn? The kid was holding a watering can. These weren't HOA officers. They were bullies in khakis with dollar store badges, and they were about to be exposed. Then a sharp screech of tires broke the tension. A black SUV tore around the corner and stopped right at the curb. My husband, Sheriff Damon Reyes, stepped out without a word. He didn't need to shout. His uniform and the star on his chest did all the talking. "What's going on here?" he asked, voice low but deadly. The taller fake officer turned, blinked twice, and immediately stiffened. Just enforcing HOA policy, sir. This property's out of compliance." My husband raised an eyebrow. "Funny, because I just called the HOA president. Not only are you not officers, you don't work for them in any capacity." He stepped forward. "Now, tell me, why are you grabbing a child and impersonating officers?" The two froze. Damon looked at Mason, who was now peeking from behind me, eyes wide, then back at them. "You're both under arrest. Turn around." They started to argue, but within seconds my husband and the backup patrol car that had just pulled up had them cuffed. One of the fakes had the audacity to ask, "How were we supposed to know he was your kid?" Damon didn't even blink. "You don't need to know who he is. You just don't put your hands on someone else's child. Ever." And just like that, Mason's tears were gone, replaced with a small, proud smile. By the time the fake HOA officers were being loaded into the back of patrol cars, the entire street had come alive. Curtains were pulled aside, phones recorded from porches, and whispers traveled faster than wildfire. The quiet neighborhood had never seen anything like it. As Damon gave a short statement to his deputies, I stood beside Mason, holding his hand as he watched the scene unfold with wide eyes. My little boy, just 7, had been yanked around like a criminal by two grown men. And now they were the ones in cuffs. That's when Mrs. Bailey, our next-door neighbor, shuffled over in her slippers, holding her tiny poodle and looking sheepish. I didn't know those men weren't real officers," she mumbled. "They told me they were hired to enforce stricter rules. I think I might have even signed something. I sighed not out of frustration with her, but with the realization that this wasn't just about two bullies. Someone was manipulating our whole community. "You're not the only one," Damon said as he approached. "We're starting an investigation." These guys weren't acting alone. That evening, Damon filed official charges, impersonating law enforcement, unlawful detainment of a minor, trespassing, and attempted intimidation. But more than that, he began working with the HOA president to figure out how this even happened. Turned out, a small group of residents had formed an unofficial neighborhood enforcement committee to bully families they didn't like, families like ours, families that didn't always fit the image. That was the phrase used in a group text Damon's team uncovered. I nearly crushed my phone, reading it. What they didn't expect was that the little boy they grabbed was the sheriff's son, and that his mother had recorded every second of it. I posted the video online that night. I didn't need to say much. I just wrote, "This happened today. These men are not officers. My son was targeted on his own front lawn. Not on my watch." Within an hour, the video had thousands of views. And within a day, the whole community would be forced to reckon with the truth. You don't get to wear fake badges and hurt children. Not here. Not ever. The morning after the video went viral, our street looked different. People walked slower, spoke quieter, and nodded a little longer when they saw us. Neighbors who'd barely said a word to us before were suddenly knocking on the door with apologies, casseroles, and embarrassed faces. The entire community had seen what happened to Mason. They saw the look in his eyes when he was dragged across his own front yard. And they saw me refusing to stay silent. What hit hardest wasn't just the brutality, it was the betrayal. These fake officers weren't strangers. They were residents. Dan from 2 houses down. Earl from the corner. Men who'd smiled at us, waved during garbage day, and asked about our rose bushes. But underneath all that was something uglier, something that came out the second they thought they could get away with it. At the emergency HOA meeting that week, Damon sat quietly at the back in full uniform. He didn't say a word as the president of the HOA, a woman named Carla Jennings, read the statement. "We are horrified and ashamed by the actions of a few individuals who misrepresented themselves and took matters into their own hands. These individuals have been permanently removed from all community responsibilities and will face full legal consequences." But that wasn't enough for most of the neighborhood. As Carla stepped away from the podium, one woman stood up and pointed at the committee members who had been part of the so-called neighborhood enforcement group. "You knew," she said. "You signed off on it. You watched it happen." The room turned tense. Another neighbor added, "This wasn't about enforcing rules. This was about control. About race." That word echoed. No one flinched. Not anymore. Damon finally rose and addressed the room. "My son was treated like a threat because of how he looks, because of who we are. But this isn't just about my family. It's about who you let represent your community." He looked around. "Are you okay with bullies running your streets?" Silence. Then slowly heads shook. Someone clapped. Then more. The HOA board resigned that night. And by morning, a petition was circulating to elect new leadership, people who actually protected the families who lived here. People who didn't need fake badges to feel powerful. It wasn't just justice. It was a turning point. The weeks that followed were a blur of media vans, interviews, and lawyers. The footage of Mason being dragged had made it to every major news outlet. Everyone had a take. Some called it racial profiling. Others called it vigilante violence. But the truth was simpler. It was hate dressed up as neighborhood enforcement. And they thought they could get away with it because we were a black family on a street that didn't expect us to speak up. But we did. Damon made sure of it. The sheriff's department opened an official investigation, not just into the men who impersonated law enforcement, but into how the HOA had enabled them. Charges were filed. Turns out, these men had done this to others, just not as loudly, not as visibly. Elderly residents, teenagers, renters, people who didn't have the sheriff's son to speak up for them. But now they did. One afternoon, as I stood on our porch sipping sweet tea, I watched Mason ride his bike again, right where it had all happened. His helmet was crooked, his knees scraped from another fall, but he was smiling. Not a forced smile, a real one. The kind that says, "I'm not scared anymore." A car slowed down in front of our house. A woman rolled down her window and waved. "That your boy?" she asked. "He's braver than most men I know." I smiled. "Yeah, that's my son." And now the whole town knew it too. Not just as the boy who got dragged off his lawn, but as the boy who stood up, who sparked change, who helped clean out a neighborhood hiding behind fake rules and fake badges. The new HOA board reached out to us with a sincere apology. This time it felt real. They offered to create a neighborhood safety committee led by actual trained officers and include families like ours. Damon agreed. On one condition, the first meeting would start with Mason's story, because this wasn't just about punishment. It was about remembering. We planted a tree on the corner of our yard the next weekend. Mason picked it, a tall red maple. We added a plaque beneath it that read, "Here, truth stood its ground," and it did, because they thought they could erase our place in this community, but instead they carved it in stone.